Chapter 9, Nation-State versus Mafia-State. Practical application of uCube to a real problem. Nation-state or mafia-state? The ultimate goal of organized crime is to replace the nation-state with a mafia-state. And unless something is done, many countries, like Mexico, will succumb. Just like a cancerous cell that grows and contaminates an entire body, uncontrolled organized crime invades a state until it crushes it, opposing his rules, laws, and values. If it is controlled, organized crime will always remain a feudal group willing to run the risks of doing illegal activities in order to obtain high profits. But if they are allowed to grow, organized crime roots until it takes over the state. The ultimate goal of organized crime is always to create a new state over the ashes of that who gave it the opportunity to survive and thrive. The cube of state and organized crime. Mafia or state? uCube explains better than any other model this grave problem that is affecting the stability of all the American continent and other parts of the world. It illustrates how order for the state is chaos for the mafia and vice versa. Shows how the cancer of organized crime grows and weakens the economic, political, and social essences of the state. Black markets topple the formal economy. Omerta knocks down the rule of law, and corruption tumbles civism when this happens. The civilization as we know it collapses, and barbarism takes over. This is very evident in the case of Mexico. Organized crime has been on the rise, the Mexican state on the retreat. Omerta is now the law of the land. Black markets are now bigger than the legitimate economy, and society is quickly losing its morals. Cube of the state. Rule the exception or make exceptions the rule? Let's not be fooled. The object of organized crime is always to create a mafia state. They want to become the state, so their omerta substitutes the rule of law. Their black markets become the means to generate wealth, and corruption and criminal values prevail over civic values. Organized crime is almost inevitable in a society. There will always be people willing to break the laws and run the risks of doing illegal activities. But when illegal activities become the norm, when banks launder money, when politicians and police get in bed with the criminals, when a mother knows his son is dealing drugs and does nothing because money is flowing and her life is improving, organized crime is taking over. This is the case in Mexico, when the mafia state takes over. Mafia state, black markets, game, economic order, legal economy, chaos 0.0.0, nation state, rule of law, formal economy and civic values, rule of law, rules political order, nation state, omerta, civism, motive social order, corruption, order 1.1.1, mafia, black markets, omerta, and corruption. Follow the money. Organized crime in Mexico is now virtually integrated under the rule of the drug lords. There are many specialized mafias: car theft, prostitution, gambling, arms dealing, kidnapping, human and organ traffic, etc. They have all been offered silver or lead, and all have accepted silver. Mexico. Organized crime generates billions of dollars in the U.S., but the costs of the mafia are in Mexico in pesos. In Mexico is where they grow the plants, where they have the labs, where they bribe the government, where they have their families. How do they move the money across the borders? They cannot call Bank of America and order a $10 billion transfer to Mexico. So what they do is they take their hoards of cash to the black markets, where the Chinese are dumping billions in products, containers are filled with merchandise, sent to Mexico, where the custom department is in their payroll. These are allowed into the country, and then they distribute all this merchandise all over the country. The power of organized crime in Mexico, 50%. This has turned organized crime into Mexico's the largest employer, according to government. More than 50% of the working population have an informal job with no identified employer, no social security, no payroll. They sell the merchandise in millions of flea markets across the country, distributing everything made in China, from piracy to home appliances, from clothing to electronics. Dozens of state governors and former governors have been or are being investigated for ties with organized crime. The ties between organized crime and judges and police forces around the nation has been greatly exposed for years. Finally, there are now cities and territories that are fully controlled by organized crime, where the Mexican state does not dare enter. Pollsters are prohibited from making census. Omerta is now the law of the land in those areas. Businessmen have to pay for protection. Racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, collusion is the rule of business. The path of the righteous. The paths of both states, Mafia and nation, walk in opposite directions. On a nation-state, an educated and civilized society votes its rulers so they can pass the laws that will allow the society to develop and live in peace. The Mafia state thrives on the ignorance of a population that is losing its values. Organized crime buys judges and politicians, gives them tons of money and helps them get elected in exchange for keeping the conditions that made them thrive. Once in their pocket, politicians, judges, and police forces become the protectors of organized crime and the enemies of society and transform the democratic system into an autocratic system where money buys power and is used to perpetuate in power. They prefer to leave outdated and complicated laws that favor process over truth. In a Mafia state, an ignorant society does not care if its rulers are in the payroll of organized crime. Laws are not changed. Privileges and loopholes are protected, providing a fertile environment for the growth of the Mafia state. The path of the nation state. With hordes of cash, they corrupt politicians and judges and buy the laws to maintain their privileges while weakening the social fiber. Government, society, laws, resources. A strong, educated society forms the government and elects its politicians who make the laws so society can generate resources and thrive. Go black and never come back. In Mexico, an erroneous state policy has made it easier to transit from legality to illegality than vice versa. It's easier to produce in the black than in the formal economy. It's easier to betray the values than live following principles. It's safer to corrupt than to follow the rule of law. All laws are created with an incentive to go underground in order to solve problems. Those who want to be legal are met with excessive regulation, taxation, and uncertainty. So the incentive to go black and never come back is very high because it's now the norm and not the exception. Mafia states, black markets, omerta, corruption. Wide avenues, nation state, wide economy, rule of law, civic values, narrow streets.